Good afternoon and welcome back to another ironic introduction to another video. Today I am doing my first thoughts and impressions on Jabari Panther. I have a little bit of number breakdown as well. As always, there is a link to the forum in the description below if you'd rather read through the ability set yourself, as well as my notes in the description, because I will be doing a little bit of number comparison using the rank 5 5-star Jabari Panther and the rank 5 5-star Nick Fury, because I do think comparing the numbers on paper will give us relative insight into the bleeds before we actually see it in game. Now, at first, my very first impression when reading through Jabari Panther's abilities was I was a little disappointed. I'm not gonna lie. At first I was like, there's not like a ton of utility here, not a ton of unique utility that we already don't have like a plethora of. It is another bleed champion, big surprise, but I don't have anything wrong with that. But bleed is not like a uncommon utility in game, so it's not the biggest utility hit for me. I'm not super stoked about it. We have this Purify value, which is pretty neat. And this is the part that when I rethought about it, I realized that it does have a lot of really good potential. It does interact with Hazard Shift, means we don't have to worry about that. It makes her a very viable answer there. It means Biohazard, Freezer Burn, and the likes. All of those work really, really well. It will also work with things like long distance relationship, maybe even Void. As long as you're hitting into Void, you won't have to worry about making sure you time your combos to the right number. You just got to make sure you have this cleanse passive. It is 2 seconds long, which isn't the longest, but it's also significantly longer than, say, I think Black Widow's insight charges are like 0.5 seconds or something. So it's a significantly longer window to the point where you could theoretically hit into the opponent and then back off and it will trigger for you. Another thing is that they do state that as a defender, if she purifies a stun debuff, this goes on cooldown, and that this does apply to parry. What that tells me is I fully believe that this will work for Jabari Panther if you're hitting into the opponent's block. Now, I'll need to see that in game before I fully confirm, but I'm fairly confident based on this interaction with parry, that means you could hit into the opponent's block. Now, that's so incredibly important because of, say, something like encroaching stun. I believe you could, instead of timing a special, you could just be hitting into the opponent when encroaching stun, not even like hitting them, just hitting into their block, and that could be potentially very, very powerful. Encroaching stun, as well as a whole plethora of other nodes where you might be getting a debuff when you might not necessarily have an opening. A good example might be Trial by Fire, where you gain an Incinerate debuff when you haven't hit the opponent. Let's say they're playing crazy passive, just hitting into their block to give you this cleanse. So that was a pretty cool utility note. So in that regard, beyond my initial impression, I do think that there might be long-standing utility value here for this new ability entering the game. So I am impressed by that. But that said, from a utility perspective, I'm not crazy impressed. She has that anti-evade, anti-miss, and then bleeds. So just like the standard utility in the bleed and the anti-miss, anti-evade, nothing crazy. We already have that present in the game. What will make those stand out to me is the damage. If the damage is potent, if it is strong and worth noting, then I will be impressed. And then this whole purification cleanse mechanic could really, really, really hit the mark. So because of that, I really had to feel like I needed to dig into the numbers. So what I did was I went and compared it to Nick. So for reference, Nick Fury's Fury is 4,141.8, whereas Jabari's is 3,899, but she does have a higher base attack rating, so her attack rating total is 6,336 compared to Nick with the extra Fury is 6,442. It's actually really, really close. That means Jabari Panther with her Fury and Nick Fury with his Fury has 98.3% of the attack rating potency. So just from a base stat value, we're actually looking at some really potentially potent bleeds, which is very, very encouraging. Additionally, I had to take a look at the bleeds themselves. So Jabari Panther's bleeds apply on crit, and on crit, she inflicts a 1584 direct damage bleed. This is over 7 seconds, and I want to compare this to Nick's bleed on light, which is 1035, I apologize, per second. Now, I will make a note that Nick Fury's light light bleed is so potent because it stacks incredibly well with deep wounds. Because a really good example is if you extend the duration of this 1584 per 7, it's actually only 226 damage per second, which means if you extend it by say 2 seconds, then you're only getting an increase of 450 damage or so. But if you increase Nick Fury's light bleed by 2 seconds, you are getting an additional 2,000 bleed potency. So that is kind of important to note and does draw a huge drawback here. So while in theory, on paper, Jabari's bleeds are actually similar or equivalent to Nick's bleeds, when you start adding the extension effects as well as the extension effects that Nick Fury has from like his deep wound, then the bleed isn't nearly as potent. So there's good potential there. I'll have to see it in game before I fully understand. Because the other thing is when you have the hunt, because hers are on crit, you get this like crazy huge crit rating increase. It's like 8,400, which is massive, which means theoretically you're probably critting 4 out of 5, probably 5 out of 5 hits very, very frequently. So even though she's got 1/5 the relative bleed potency, it's triggering 5 times as often, so she kind of matches pace there. What will really, really put this into mark or perspective and whether or not she's actually coming out as a relevant potency bleeder is the special 2, which pauses the hunt, and they go out of their way to say is a lot of hits. Now, the hunt is only 9 seconds, 12 seconds with her awakened ability. So pausing it and making that active point on the SP2 makes me think this SP2 is very long and hopefully like 9 to 10 hits. Like, it really needs to be a significant, substantial amount of hits for me to feel like it really, really warrants that damage value. So I'll have to wait and see in game. Maybe I'd say 6 to 7 is like the minimum number of hits. If it's anything less than 6 to 7, then you're just better off throwing, right, like a regular combo. Or if the attack potency on this SP2 is crazy high, so it like bumps that bleed potency a lot, that's another really good option as well. So my overall summary is that from a utility perspective, I don't feel like she's offering anything crazy unique outside of that Purify. But that Purify really, really came back and made me think. So I think that has a lot of really good potential. Just Biohazard and Freezer Burn alone in a skill champion is really solid. So I do look forward to that. The only thing to keep in mind is that, again, this works like stagger, so it doesn't do anything about debuffs that are already placed on you. So it does almost need to be debuff effects that can either be removed elsewhere, like Void with multi-hit, or it needs to be on-hit debuffs like Biohazard and Freezer Burn. So, but that alone does introduce a lot of interesting potentials for the future, albeit tad bit niche on a skill champion. And then, sorry, one more comment here is just the fact that I do think that people are saying that she's going to be like crazy high skill. I just don't think so. I think that they've set up her kit to be like, once you learn her, to actually be very, very simple. Timing the hunt to trigger with the special is actually very simple because you gain these charges just by parrying and then hitting into the opponent. So you just want to ramp up to 7 to 9 and then parry and then hit the opponent while they're stunned, and you'll build the hunt on like that. And because like they actually put a timer on it too, it's actually really, really quick. I don't think it'll be that hard. And you have a 1 second interval, so you could even hit into the opponent and then launch your special, or you could parry the opponent, then launch your special, and let the hits from the special trigger the hunt. So I think it'll be relatively forgiving from a player perspective. And then the heavy sounds complicated to land when you're thinking about a 12-second interval, but she gets unstoppable from her heavies. So you don't even need to parry the opponent. You can actually just dash back, hold block, and then as soon as they dash into you, charge your heavy, which makes it very forgiving to get in, and means that you can use it against champions who can't be stunned as well. So I think overall, from a player perspective, she'll be modest tier, like moderate difficulty, but I don't think she's going to be as difficult as, say, Nick Fury in his Fury phase, where you're playing with 30% health. I'm hopeful. I gotta be hopeful. As always, let me know what you think. Let me know if I missed anything, and I'll talk to y'all later. Peace.